Good afternoon, and welcome to the National University Speaker Series. My name is Nancy Rowland Heinrich, and I serve as the Executive Vice President of Communications and Community Engagement for National University. I am also proud to be the founder and host of our NU Speaker Series. For the past 3 years, we have held over 30 webinars with notable presenters on a diverse array of topics that have provided valuable information for our audiences. We so appreciate all of you attending today's session, whether you are a student, an alum, faculty, staff, or community member. We welcome all of you. National University is committed to community and reaching out to all sectors. We just celebrated our 52nd anniversary in November, and we are proudly serving more than 50,000 diverse students enrolled in more than 150 different degree programs at the doctorate, master's, as well as undergraduate level. Our alumni network now exceeds 230,000 accomplished alum and dedicated professionals in diverse fields. In today's session, we have an interesting topic that we can all relate to, focused on navigating work, education, and life with purpose at every age. Our speaker, Dr. Thomas Stewart, serves as the EVP and Executive Director of the Cause Research Institute for National University. He also co-chairs the Social Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council at NU. Before his current position, Dr. Stewart served as president of John F. Kennedy University, as well as president of Patton University. Tom is a very experienced executive leader with more than 30 years of K-12 and higher ed experience and professional experience in the field of criminal justice reform, innovation, and transformation. Throughout his career, he has been committed to providing educational and other developmental opportunities for underserved and underrepresented individuals and communities. Dr. Stewart has co-founded or led over 20 schools, universities, and nonprofit organizations, including the Black Alliance for Educational Options and National Black Graduate Student Association. He has authored numerous publications on school reform, parent involvement, criminal justice reform, and leading change with grace. Dr. Stewart proudly served in the U.S. Army. He earned a PhD in government from Harvard University and a BA in political science from the University of the District of Columbia. Clearly, Dr. Stewart has a fascinating career and is very passionate about today's topic, which should be relevant to all of us. Please note that following the presentation, we will have a moderated Q&A session. Today, we are joined by one of my talented colleagues, Miss Ashley Webb, who will serve as the moderator for the discussion following the presentation. Ashley currently is the Director of Communications for National University. So at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Thomas Stewart to share his insights on this interesting topic. Tom?
Thank you, Nancy, for that wonderful introduction, and good evening and afternoon, depending on where you are in the country or around the world. It's my pleasure to engage you all on this really, really important topic. And the notion of navigating work, education, and life with purpose at every age is a topic that I think we should revisit individually, collectively, frequently, in some cases monthly, just to remind ourselves of how important it is to maintain great work-life balance and to do it with purpose. And by purpose, we mean being intentional. Recently, members of the leadership team read a book called The Perennials, which was recommended by President Milliron. And in the book, it talks about how in a lot of organizations, particularly like ours, there's upwards of 6 to 7 generations of people in the workforce. And if you include our students, we definitely cover 7 generations. And one of the things that author points out is that regardless of age, we have a lot more in common from a generational perspective than we realize. And as I did a little research on this topic in preparation for the presentation today, what I'd like to do is hone in on those factors that we all should consider, whether we're at the beginning of our careers, in the middle, or somewhere in an advanced stage. In a few minutes, I'll share a list of recommendations for why and how to maintain work-life balance, regardless of role, title, age, or other factors. Leading by example is one of the recommendations I'll make, and I must share a personal story to live up to that recommendation. And essentially, I would say openly but discreetly, the last few years have been really tough for me. And the research suggests that that's true for most of us. We live in an unprecedented moment in history with technology, social media, various demands on our lives, and maintaining good balance is really tough. One of the things that was really helpful to me, and this will be part of what I recommend to many of you, was being humble and being very open, particularly from a professional standpoint, to reach out to colleagues. And want to send a special shout out to Sandy Bess, head of HR, and former president and chancellor at NU, Michael Cunningham. I had to explain to them some things that were happening in my life in order to figure out a way that I could manage everything that was coming at me. And it required being humble, trusting that things that I shared with them would remain confidential. And it was key to doing something that I just couldn't do alone. And both Michael and Sandy were very receptive, very supportive, and unfortunately, I was able to find that balance. So a lot of what I'll recommend to you all today is against that kind of backdrop for me, but I think you all have your own stories. But regardless, once again, of what titles or roles or other factors that often make us appear different, we're all human, and life will remind us of that. That it's easier to overcome life challenges with the support of others versus attempting to address them all alone. And I look forward to sharing with you a few insights, and we would like to make this interactive. So Ashley and I have a couple questions for you on the heels of the presentation. So look forward to your responses, and we'd like to open up the chat at some point for your advice, particularly if there are things that I don't cover that you think others should be aware of. So Heather, could we go to the first slide? Essentially, I've have 9 recommendations for you all, and I've divided them into 3 categories. The first one is time management. And I think a lot of what I'll share and recommend is focused on our professional lives, but it's equally as applicable and transferable often to our personal lives. But I'll use mostly professional examples, and hopefully you can modify it for your purposes. But the thing I've learned personally, and the research bears this out, is because our lives are so overwhelming, many of us are parents and caretakers, supporting other family members. We're in school. We are what the president and Geraldo like to call Anders. That's who we serve, and more importantly, that's who we are. And so that means at any given time, there are multiple things that we could be doing, but it's important to hone in on those things that make the most sense and are most time sensitive in that moment, and often tabling other things and not feeling guilty about that. That's really important. And the second one here is setting boundaries. Particularly from a professional standpoint, one of the things that I love, absolutely love about NU are the committed and extraordinarily talented people across the organization. It's one of the things that has kept me here and probably will keep me here much longer. But I've met people and I've counseled them on setting boundaries. It's so easy for us to work late into the night and on weekends. But part of a good work-life balance is knowing when to cut it off, turn it off. And that includes setting boundaries around the things that you do and the discrete aspects of your lives or our lives. Once again, we're parents, we're caretakers to other family members. We are in school, we have a personal life, hopefully and other things that are important and make us whole and complete as human beings. And so setting boundaries around the things that you're going to do for yourself. And some of the things I'm going to recommend are overlapping, but I would encourage us all to think about, how do we work as efficiently, effectively as possible within a reasonable, say, 40 to 50-hour week, and resist, particularly on a consistent basis, working 70, 60, 70 hours. And I'm probably in the mid of my career. I look at my career as being like a 60-year stretch of time. And I'm midway there. I remember early in my career, I worked 65, 70 hours a week with a smile. And what I recognize is that's a recipe for burnout. And so if you're playing a long game, and I think all of us have a career span of at least 50 years, you have to be really judicious about how we invest our times professionally throughout our work life. And so it's equally as important to be balanced around setting boundaries early in our careers as well as later. And then for those of us who are managers and who are used to doing almost everything hands-on, because for whatever reason, we feel like if we control it, we can own it. But delegating for several reasons. One, it's the best way to groom others in the organization so that they can take on increased responsibilities and prepare themselves to move up the leadership rank. So when you don't delegate, it's almost a form of hoarding the work. So that's one reason. I think the other reason is when we attack or tackle things collectively, we're more efficient and effective. And it's once again a good way to make sure that we're not overexerting ourselves. Next slide, Heather. The second category of recommendations is what I'm calling recharging. And the things I would recommend in this category are not only from a career perspective, but almost down to the day, especially given that many of us work remotely, and turning it off is tougher than it was in many cases than when we worked in the office. At least when we worked in the office and we didn't take work home, we would essentially leave assignments in the office and return to them the next day or after the weekend. Now that we work remotely and we are an organization that's committed to it, as you all know, we're still, as a society, in the early stages of understanding the pros and cons of it. But one thing that's been recommended is to take frequent breaks during the day. And weather and other factors permitting, getting out for a walk. In fact, I would encourage you, and I'm starting to incorporate in my workday phone calls that I can take on my phone using a headset, while, getting in a few thousand steps, working outside the home at a coffee shop or some other setting that's quiet and peaceful, and allows me to focus on work, but it gets me out of the house. And so that taking a break piece is critical to longevity. So want to strongly recommend it. And then the disconnect here means leaving work, and especially when you take time off. I was horrible, and to some extent I still am. My EA and others who work with me, we have to have conversations about not taking my emails, not accepting my phone calls, not responding to my texts when I said I'm going to take a break. Some people might call me a workaholic, but when you love what you do, which is my case, it's very difficult to sometimes to break away from it. So being very conscious about the importance of leaving work uh, at work in a given day, over the weekend, or for other extended periods of time is critical as part of recharging. And then practicing self-care. One of my mentors once told me the litmus test for how well I am doing in life is how well I'm taking care of myself. She encouraged me to think about myself as a cup. And my goal in life is to create abundance. And she encouraged me to create abundance so that everything that flows out of my cup is what I give to the world. Everything that's in my cup is what I keep for myself. And when my cup becomes depleted, what it means is I'm not maintaining work-life balance. I'm not, generally speaking, in a healthy place. And more importantly, I don't have anything to give to the world or family. So I strongly encourage you all and us, to exercise, to eat well, to do fun things, to surround yourself with people who support you, and make it a point to have a date with yourself on a frequent basis, and do those things that make you happy, that make you smile, that make you laugh. Next slide, Heather. So last category is invest in the future. And I think a big part of investing in the future, going back to that analogy of the cup and creating abundance, is you. So for me, this term future is us individually. And, we say this as a university, but this has implications for being healthy. And, the reality is, and many of you all know, we had Michelle Weiss here for a while, and she wrote a book, living, working lifelong, and it's a long life. I read so many books, I can't remember titles sometimes. Learning lifelong, and in it, she cites research that says any person born after 2016, on average, will live to be at least 100. So the reality for all of us is we're going to live beyond our imagination, regardless of what generation that we're in. And it's becoming increasingly common for people to work into their 70s and 80s because they're living into their 90s and their hundreds. And so what that means is that being committed to lifelong learning has huge implications for remaining relevant and viable, both personally and professionally. So encourage you all to own that commitment to learning lifelong, and then seek support. I use the example. I didn't go into a lot of detail about some of the challenges I had. Uh, we have an excellent mental health, well, healthcare benefits in general. One of the strengths of being employed at National And for alums and others outside of national, I hope you have access to benefits. And it's one thing to have benefits, it's another thing to take advantage of them. And mental health, I think, is one of those things that we should be proactive about. I don't know what you all's philosophy is about seeing a counselor or therapist. I certainly came from a household where it was shunned. But as I've matured as a human being, I've met some wonderful people who are in the profession and I have retained them. It's one of the best investments that you can make. And so when I say seek support, it's in a variety of ways, annual checkups. Uh, can't emphasize that enough. I know people will go years before they have a checkup, and it's just so easy to do. It's an hour commitment or less a year that allows you to stay on top of where you are with your health overall and being proactive about it. And so I want to strongly encourage you to be open and seek support, throughout your careers and in your personal life, and encourage other people in your life who may be a bit resistant to the notion of seeking support. It's a humble thing to do, and practicing humility has huge dividends. And I can tell you that from personal experience. And as I mentioned, lead by example. Um, Particularly for those of us in management and leadership roles, we can't tell our people to take a break when they see us working hard. Um, uh, I've had to learn, for example, uh, not to send people emails over the weekend if I want them to disconnect. Because when they get an email from me and I'm quote unquote their boss, in many cases, I've learned the hard way. They thought that was urgent. But for me, it's work. And I do it 6, 7 days a week. So I've had to learn how to manage that. I've had to learn how to take breaks, vacations, and Athena and Steve and other people I work with closely, Annabelle, Emily, will tell you that I've had to make a huge effort to disconnect. And so, and I do it because I'm trying to set an example. That's the part that's made it easier for me. If I'm doing it for me, I'm going to fail. But now that I've got the onus of setting an example as why I do it, it gives me added motivation. I hope these suggestions prove to be helpful. I look forward to the dialogue, and I'm curious to know what your responses will be to a couple of questions. So, Ashley, I invite you to join me.
Hi. Wow. Thanks so much, Dr. Stewart. That was really insightful on a really meaningful topic today. And I also want to thank Dr. Rowland for the warm welcome in the beginning. I think, one of the things that you didn't mention is that I'm also an NU alumnus. So it's very exciting to get to be here and moderate today's discussion with Dr. Stewart. Thanks to the alumni team, but also thanks to everyone for listening today and joining us, and for those who will watch this in the future. I think it's a crucial step as we talk about living with purpose. As Dr. Stewart mentioned, it's lifelong learning, and that's what we're all doing and investing in ourselves today, taking some time. So I think one of the things too, I know Patricia's been reminding everyone to please contribute any questions to the Q&A. We definitely want to hear from you. As a director of comms, the most important part of communications to me anyhow is the listening part and learning about your audience. So with that in mind, I think we'll ask Heather to kick off our first poll. We want to get everyone involved in the convo and help Tom and I through this, where the first one, I believe, is on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being poor and 5 being very well. How well are you maintaining your work-life balance? So if everyone can go ahead and weigh in on that. And Tom, I wanted to, before we'll let everyone kind of weigh in, um, you talked a lot about the importance of time management and, some key elements of how we do that. But I'm curious, one of the things you also touched on was the importance of disconnecting. And I think now, with so many of us working remotely, there is a little more balance, but also not. You can't necessarily drop work at the front door when it's literally in your house. Um, but on the flip side of that coin, I think that there are also so many people, a lot of studies reporting increased loneliness with this remote style and fatigue. And, even with all the technology, they're disconnected in the wrong way or in a kind of a damaging way. So, how, or maybe before we get to the how, I mean, I guess why is it so important to live with purpose? What are some of the benefits to finding purpose in our lives when we're just trying
Yeah.
to maintain?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Ashley, and I think a really deep one that everyone has to grapple with in their own personal way. I came from a working class blue collar family, and most of my family members, I remember very early uh, telling me to get quote unquote a good government job and to essentially hold on to it for 20 years and retire. And that was the goal. And, as I traveled and experienced other cultures, met other people, uh, I realized that all of us have a different opportunity, which is to kind of define life on our terms. And so it's not pursuing kind of the default thing, which is just a good job. It's thinking about what are your talents? What really excites you? How does that align with employment or career opportunities? How do you start to take baby steps to get there? Assuming you're out of practicality, you have to generate income and you may, for periods of your life, and I've been a bike messenger, a cook, I've been a bunch of stuff. And it all adds up in a way that is meaningful in the long run. But I think purpose begins with just having a conversation with self about what in life can be most gratifying. That way we latch on to it and it gives us a reason to get up in the morning and to feel good about ourselves at night versus once again doing things by happenstance, uh, overly deferring to other people's recommendations, assumptions about who we are and what we could be. I think that's one part of the answer. I appreciate your point about the what we're learning about the downside of remote work, right? And particularly the isolation and the lack of community. Uh, once again, with purpose and being intentional, means putting things on the calendar that get me out of the house, that connect me with people. And what I'd like to do, and hopefully others that live outside of California attempt to do, is identify other new employees in the area. To the extent that there are professional development opportunities that are offered by the university or we can access as being a member of the university. I think that's another way to get out, create community, break that grip of isolation and a sense of being disconnected from colleagues. I certainly was one of those people that loved that aspect of being in the office, but at the same time, I appreciate remote work.
Yeah, I know, and your alma mater, Harvard, actually has put out a few pieces on some of the benefits of living with purpose include like longer life, and a healthier life and finding more success, and going beyond the self. I think, next, some of my questions are digging a little more into the how, but before we do that, I wanted to see if those poll results are in from the work life balance. I don't, so let's see. It looks like, wow, it looks like a lot of people are actually doing really well. But there is still kind of that on average, which I honestly think that's sort of where I put myself, is kind of in the middle. Some days I think I do better than others, with two kids and work and everything else. Life is a lot. And as you touched on, Dr. Stewart, we have a lot of Anders in our NU community. I mean, I think it's really throughout the world, right? We're all balancing this and that. That's what makes us so complex. It's also what keeps us up at night. And so this is leads perfectly. I think as let's kick off, Heather, the next poll, while we talk about this one a little more, which are where we would rate some of our challenges. Our
Yeah.
key
Yeah,
challenges.
and I agree with you. It's good to see those results. It looks like about 35% uh, um, are at that 1 and 2 level. And this second poll question kind of gets at, what are the factors um, that we're most challenged by to maintain work-life balance. And we'd love to connect the two poll results after people complete this one.
Yeah. So I think as we dig into kind of, back to thinking about how we all have a lot on our plates, like now more than ever. There's so many things that everyone's trying to do. And how do you think, what are some of the best ways when you're managing everything and you're just trying to get it all done, and get it all done well? How do you find purpose? We know why it can lead us to be healthier and more successful and happier, but how do we find time? I mean, we're just trying to get, these things done, let alone, find the time to integrate a purpose into this. Like, my purpose is to get it done. So
Yeah, yeah.
what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the purpose is serving. And, there's a lot of love about in you, but probably the top thing I love is that we're in the business of human development. I mean, we offer people something critical to advancing their lives, and doing it in a very purposeful and meaningful way, which is education. And, to tie that into Black History Month, happy, Black History Month, education was something, as African Americans, we truly celebrate. And I think any immigrant who comes to America, is the first thing that they appreciate is the quality of the educational offerings that we as Americans take for granted. If you travel other parts of the world, you'll be amazed at just how just basic education is so much more advanced than other parts of the world. But I would say, for me, the purpose comes from serving people, and our mission is to be about that. And so to be aligned with an institution that has that as its mission, and to know that to a person, we all sign up to be affiliated with NU, whether we are employees or students, is because of that. We recently created the Cause Research Institute. And when I met with the president, and it was his brainchild, it was about this notion of purpose. How do we help our students connect the things that they're learning in the classroom, the knowledge, the skills, the competencies? Once again, not to just get a job, but to take what they're learning and to be problem solvers, to be difference makers. And we have students in 50 states across the country and multiple countries around the world. And we want to empower them to view their educational experience, their affiliation with national, as part of that purpose. And I think it's, we all have an opportunity to define it. And mine might look different than others, but it's low-hanging fruit. It's just, being conscious and intentional about pursuing it is what I would say.
like that. I like that a lot. And so I think we're still gathering maybe some of our last test result, or I'm sorry, test, some of our last poll results. Oh no, we're ready. Okay, so let's go ahead and see. I'm really curious to see which challenges. Um, wow. So okay, it looks like here the biggest challenge of work-life balance is work. That doesn't surprise me at all. I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Stewart? Is that?
Yeah, and that's where that category around time management, I would say, doesn't surprise me. It's about how do you have more effective conversations with your direct report about how do you address that? Because that's something that you have to do in concert with other people that you work with. Uh, and that's assuming it's imposed by the organization. The other challenge, and I wish we could tease this out with people, it's the self piece of it. Some of us are just not good at, once again, setting boundaries, prioritizing our time. I used to be a notorious procrastinator, and it seemed harmless until I started to take on more demanding roles and realized that that just wasn't going to work for me. I didn't have the ability to delay something to the last minute and clear my calendar because everything on my calendar is equally as important as this thing that I should have completed hours or days ago. So unpacking that work piece, I think, would really be important. And then the second here is finances. Um, we unfortunately live in a world that one of the things that makes me most uncomfortable is how wealth seems to be increasingly concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people, at the expense of larger numbers of people having less of it. Um, so I definitely empathize with folks who've selected that one, and that's not an easy solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the point of boundaries and the work schedule being one of the biggest challenges. How do you think what would be your advice to folks where you know, how to help them maybe set those boundaries with supervisors or with other colleagues at work, or even if you're working remote, I find it kind of challenging with my family. Of like, I understand I'm in my home, but I am working, that doesn't, I'm not free to do this or that. What's your advice to setting those boundaries?
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. I mean, I think support groups, people personally and professionally that we rely on. I'm a big believer that before we have the kind of conversation we're suggesting here, that you consult other people to make sure you're approaching the conversation as thoughtfully and as efficiently as possible versus waking up one day and say, I'm gonna go talk to my boss about something. And really don't think it through. Um, so that's one piece of it. I think the other thing is, we are often running with ERGs, employee resource groups across the university, and they've gone viral. I like to think for those of us within national and for those that are alums and have other affiliations, if you have those type of internal resources, I think it's a good place to broach the topic. Whether it's a women's ERG or Hispanic or some of the other types of ERGs we have. I think we have one for parents. Uh, the question about work-life balance is almost unique to any of those hats that we wear. And so being in discussion with other people about one, how are they balancing life? And for people to kind of drop in the chat things that they would recommend to us that I didn't cover. And I think in ERGs and in other support groups, we're around people that we trust, have a similar perspective and set of experiences in life that could be really helpful to us. Because I think the big challenge for most of us, if we're first generation anything, we talk a lot about being first generation educated. Some of us are kind of first generation parents and well, take that back. I don't think any of us first generation parents, hard to be that But I would say things like managers taking on like professional roles and titles that nobody else in our families could have fathomed. Um, consulting people that can help you think through this
Yeah,
topic.
that's a good one. That's definitely, reaching out for advice. I am looking at, we've got some great questions in the Q&A, and I want to address some of these as well. There's one in here that's beyond remote work today, presently. Um, are you anticipating any other changes to how humans might navigate work, education, and personal life in the future? I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I tell you, we should invite, Steve Johnson. I think we had an alum recently with a strong AI background, um, artificial intelligence. Um, there are product lines, a group of NU leaders, Nancy was included, recently visited Apple. They invited us to Cupertino, uh, California, to Apple Park. And we had a highly confidential discussion with the possibility of having some type of collaborative relationship with them. But they shared with us products that they're beta testing. And one of them, just to give you an example, and our graduate students will love this, um, is a form of AI that will do a literature review for you or create a bibliography. You tell them the topic and provide other detailed information, and they'll, in like seconds produce a list. And I think about when I was writing my dissertation and almost any other publication I worked on since then, a reading list or bibliography uh, take weeks. And now you can do it almost in a split second. I just use that as one example. I know some people are very fearful of AI, um, but I think there are some people that were afraid of the car when they were hooked on horses and landlines before they introduced mobile phones. It's just a wave of the future, but there are some forms of AI that will be really helpful and will help us save time. Um, and so we have to embrace it. That's my quick response to that. I could be long-winded on this one, but for the sake of time, we'll move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, no, I like it. What about your time in the Army? I mean, do you think that that helped shape some of your thoughts on, finding purpose through service? Was that, kind of an early point of what gave you that idea, or do you think we could borrow some of the philosophies of, military life to help us live
Yeah,
with
I tell you the Army and any branch of service um, is really unique because there's a science behind it in terms of how they induct you. And in my case, it was basic training. Um, two things that I will never forget and appreciate most about the military. One was it taught me how to learn. I was a horrible student, K-12, but I didn't do homework. I didn't study, didn't know how to study. And those things were just critical in the military. And everyone was expected to do it. I mean, learning your M16A1 rifle, 5.56 millimeter lightweight air-cooled gas-operated weapon fired from no bullet. I mean, you don't eat until you say that, right? Um, and take it apart, blindfold, first aid, nuclear, biological warfare. We were expected to learn those things that, prior to the military, I can't learn that. I'm not smart enough to do that. But there was a universal expectation, regardless of gender, ethnicity, where you came from. So that was one thing. The other thing that made that possible was we were told, and I use the first aid as an example, you're not learning first aid to apply it to yourself. You're learning it in case something happens to your buddy. And if something happens to them, you're going to be the person that they're going to rely on. And if something happens to you, you need to make sure everybody around you knows it. So once one of us learned it, then you looked around and saw who was struggling and you helped them. Because the assumption was I was in a platoon of 40 people, everybody had to know it or nobody knew it. There were consequences for everybody if one person didn't know. And I think that's once again the beauty of how I define service, my expectation about it, and what I'm committed to doing. And I believe everybody can learn, without a doubt.
Yeah, I like that. That's a positive take. So I want to address another question in the chat. This is asking, do you have any mantras that have helped you as a leader promote balance for you and your teams?
Well, I was going to be a bachelor for life and never have children. I have two now. I have a daughter who's 13, and she's named after me, Tommy. And the purpose behind the name was to remind me how to play. Um, I have visions of little Tommy, as I was called growing up, and he loved to play. But like most of you, a switch clicked on at some point in my late teens, early adult years, and I stopped playing. My daughter reminds me of the significance of playing. And so I've been incorporating more of that into my life. I get a kick out of trying new things. Most recently, archery. She and I take cooking classes, dance classes. She got me out on roller skates recently and I almost broke my neck. So that ended pretty quickly. But, for those of us who have young people, whether they're our biological family members or not, I think they are often a great source of inspiration around balance. And once again, being conscious about saying, I want to do something and exploring possibilities. I mean, with internet searches, it's just so easy to identify resources nearby and just taking advantage of them. And then, reconnecting with family and friends or forming new relationships can be really helpful as well.
Good. All right. So, kind of leading over to as we look at a different stage, right? We've talked a lot about those who are really in it. They're in the family life, work life, trying to balance. Possibly throwing in education in the mix with that too, or switching careers. But what about kind of when you're on the back end of that and you're sort of winding down? On maybe your children have now moved out, now you're kind of nearing the end of your career. What's your take on finding purpose? Do I retire? What would I do then? There's a lot of research behind working longer gives you purpose and helps you to live longer, but I don't know, what do you think about that? Is that the case? Can you still find purpose without work?
Yeah, love that question. We often talk about life expectancy, but I think it's equally as important to think about health expectancy because they go hand in hand. And because we're living longer, we're also healthier and capable of doing things if we choose to. I saw somebody in chat mention that they're on their second career. I think second, third careers are possibilities. And I think, second, third careers could be hobbies that, we start with that. This fun thing I love to do, I want to monetize it. How do I do that? Instead of starting with, I need to make money and I'm going to do this thing. How do we kind of flip the script and say, what do I really like? What's this thing I've always liked to do? Maybe going back to childhood and rekindling an interest in it and figuring out a way, whether it's volunteerism or once again, monetizing it. I think just being open to ways that we can give as long as we're on this earth, support others, help to improve the community. And so for me, it has to start with something bigger than me, something that transcends me. as the motivation for doing that thing. Because if I don't have that, I'd be a couch potato, right? For the most part, if I'm not connected with something in other people who are motivated to pursue something that's gratifying, inspirational, and energetic.
Yeah, I mean, what do you, as we kind of close out today's conversation, what's your, what are your final thoughts on this in terms of where we're going, what we have to look forward to? You know, we're kind of post-pandemic now, and what's it's an election year. There's a lot going on. I mean, I feel like on one side of the coin, you can easily get in your head and be a little frustrated and nervous. And on the other side, there's a lot of positives and things to look forward to. Where do you land on this?
Well, first, I'm really thankful for an opportunity to present and have a very open, informal discussion with colleagues, with alumni, maybe even some students are here. Um, Once again, we're all human beings, and we have so much more in common than we often think about. And just a desire to live our fullest life is a common denominator amongst all of us. And so I appreciate you, Nancy, uh, Heather, and others that helped to orchestrate this event and all the other exciting speaker series that have been hosted and will be hosted. And I would just like to end by challenging everyone, particularly those that uh, rated 1 or 2, to take from this conversation one thing that you will apply going forward, and be intentional about that thing for as long as you can. Someone mentioned in chat, and I'll echo this because I think it's a good point. Put it on your calendar. And I think the person said they color code what's on their calendar. Have on my calendar blocks of time. Um, and we all respect each other's calendars for the most part. That those blocks of time are intended for me to do things, to recharge, to disconnect, to do all those things I encourage you all to do. And I suggest that you do something similar, given your circumstances. And thank you for listening to me. I hope I said something that will be helpful, and wish you all the best.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. I think that's such a key point, to live with intention, and to point out. I agree. Thank you to the Alumni Association. They're very much a pillar of support for our NU community and the community at large. So, Nancy, Dr. Rowland, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I think that your words of wisdom certainly resonated with all of us. Everyone participating, please know this is how you can get a hold of Tom Stewart, either through him directly by email and just CC his EA, but he'd be happy to hear from you and start a dialogue on that area. Tom has been involved with a lot of different type of speaking engagements on behalf of the university, always very insightful, but this is kind of how we live our lives. And, it really can be a challenge. I do not get an A+ in work-life balance, never have, but it's just something that we all learn from. So just really appreciate your attentiveness to the topic. Ashley, great job moderating and really, um, presenting some great questions to Tom that really opened up the dialogue. Love to share with you some upcoming events that are happening at the university tomorrow night. Vibrant Voices, celebrating Black excellence through the arts. That's for our students and Alumni Association. We've got Alumni Association meetings and chapter chats coming up. We have a fan appreciation night at the Gulls. National University will also be hosting the World Affairs Council. We'll be having another speaker series during the month of March. So look forward to seeing posts on other activities. We really appreciate our alumni team for your support. We appreciate our speaker, Dr. Stewart. and especially Ashley as moderator, and definitely our audience. And again, I know we've had many alum that joined us, students, faculty, staff, as well as community members. Thank you for being a part of the National University Speaker Series.